So what's up guys, back to another video. This time it's going to be on the second year of training, natural training that I've done, and we're going to be going over some points. So we're going to be going over the summary of my training and over things that helped me out during that year that could potentially help you guys out. So my second year training, I was doing a lot of compound movements, and which beginners usually do in their first year. I started to do isolation movements. And so if you mix compound and isolation movements, this is greatly going to recruit as much muscle as you possibly can, because compounds focus on multiple muscle groups and isolation movements focus on specific muscle groups. So if you want to focus on your bicep, for example, you want to focus on isolation movements only for that muscle group in order to grow it at a better potential rate than your other muscles. So in that second year of training, I started to sculpt around my body. So I started to pick muscles and I started to emphasize on muscles that I found were lacking. In first year of training, usually what you go through is compound movements, and going through those compound movements, you gain muscle and you see your lacking points. You start to see those points where you need to improve on. And so in the second year of training, that's when you want to pump up on that isolation, just to really get into those muscles and to sculpt as much as possible. It's going to make you pack on muscle. Isolation movements is really going to help emphasize and to fixate yourself on muscles that need improvement. As a summary of it all, I started to notice growth in secondary muscle groups. So what I mean by secondary muscle groups, I mean by muscle groups that we tend not to focus on too much. And so compound lifts, we know which muscle groups we're using. For squats, we're using our legs, our entirety of our legs, multiple muscle groups, the hamstrings, the quads are getting worked, the calves are getting worked, your abs are getting worked, the lower back is getting worked, the bench press works the upper chest, the lower chest, pectoralis, the front delts as well. Oh yeah, overhead military press, that's a good one too. That is going to emphasize on your shoulders. It's going to work your side delts, it's going to work your front delts, it's going to work your rear delts. Deadlifts are a great one too. They're going to work your hamstrings, they're going to work your calves, they're going to work your overall lower body or your quads, mostly in that lower region. You're going to feel in your back too. You're going to feel your traps being worked. So compound lifts can really emphasize on the overall extension of your body. And isometrics, such as in isolation movements, are going to focus purely on those one muscle groups that you want to work on in order to emphasize them, in order to sculpt them as much as possible. What I mean secondary muscle groups, I'm talking about muscle groups we don't usually look at. So that could be like the teres major, the teres minor. So those are found right near your scapula, right next to it basically. That's found like right under your rear delts, that upper portion of the lat. Like those are secondary muscles that you usually wouldn't work on because you're working on compound lifts mostly at the beginning of your years. I started to include exercises that would work on those. Another secondary muscle would be the forearms. You have the brachioradialis, which is going to be next to the bicep here. And then you have the brachialis, like basically your extensors, forearm muscles, and like it could be your extensors, it could be your flexors. Like these are going to be your flexors, these are going to be your extensors, like the lower traps, the lower region of the traps. Secondary muscles can also be the long head of the bicep. That's something people don't really focus on. Some people just focus on the short head of the bicep and they don't, isolate the long head of the bicep. They're muscle groups that people don't really fixate on. Another one would be the side delts. Side delts are what's going to give you the capping of your shoulders. The rear delts is also going to give you that capping 3D look that people want on their shoulders as well. Some people tend to not work their front delts as well in the gym because maybe their form is bad with compound lifts, and thus they need to work on the front portion of the delts. And so those are like secondary muscles that people tend not to work on, and those are the ones I worked on during my second year of training. And during my second year of training, working on those secondary muscles really helped to give me a 3D look. It helped to have striation in my muscles. That's what makes the difference between, normal lifters and people who lift with isolation movements. When you lift with isolation movements, you can target that muscle better and really, you know, develop it. You can really mature that muscle. So compound lifts are going to give you some maturity, but doing isolation is really going to get in there and look at different types of fibers that your muscle can be worked on. And so isolation is going to give you a benefit into working different types of fibers into your muscle, because you're contracting it in a different way. It's all about angles. It's all about, you know, contracting it a different way, you know, tension over time. You know, these things play into the muscle's maturity. A second thing that I changed during my second year of natural training is my frequency in training. And so I picked a split that was reasonably going to give me as much muscle as possible, also granting me a good amount of rest. There, I didn't mark it at first, but I chose a PPL split. So a PPL split is basically a push, pull, leg, rest. So on day 1 you work your pushing movements, on day 2 you work your pulling movements, and on day 3 you work your legs. And then on the 4th day you rest. So it'd be like 3 days on, 1 day off, 3 days on, 1 day off. And that split gave me substantial amount of muscle. And you know, as an individual, for me it works, and for other people, you know, it could be different. You know, they could have an upper lower split. They can have a different kind of split that works for themselves. They could have a Arnold split. They can have a split where it's posterior, anterior groups of your muscles, and then the rest. You know, like, it can be a multitude of things. As long as you're consistent with your split, I think that's the best possible outcome to get as much muscle as possible, is being consistent, which not a lot of people are. Some of them are more effective than others, but you want a split that's going to give you an overall and a good amount of rest. So in my first year, I only trained 3 times a week. I didn't train much, but I still gained a good amount of muscle. But in my second year, I started to like training. I started to indulge in it more. I started to see the benefits of it, and I just kept gaining muscle. So I was like, heck, you know, I'm gonna go all in. So I decided to do a frequency of 5 to 6 times per week, and that frequency allowed me to push into my limits. It allowed me to attain much more maturity on my muscles. So I started to see lines into my muscles. So for example, if I take my biceps, you would just see the line across here, you know, that shadow. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about maturity. I talk about the formation of the fibers in your muscle being developed.